I'm going to spend a couple minutes talking about the firm and how we invest. It's really interesting and fascinating, really. Then I'm going to talk for a couple minutes about what we're investing in right now, which I think you'll find interesting as well. And then we'll transition and hear from the CIOs. So to start with, we are a late-stage investor. So when you, in the Silicon Valley, if you go meet with Greylock or Andreessen or Kleiner Perkins or Sequoia, they're all betting on the future. They're wondering, what's going to happen with blockchain in the future? What's going to happen with quantum? What's going to happen with IoT? They all have really strong opinions about what may happen in the future, what the market may want to do. We're actually very different. We're a late-stage investor and what's known as a growth acceleration investor, which is really different compared to what you might be used to in the Valley. The firm was founded 20 years ago. We have about 20 billion under management. We have about 120 companies that we either own outright or a majority of or a minority investment in. But it's a very, very large firm, and we deploy about $2 billion a year in new capital. The fascinating part, and I spent 17 years as an entrepreneur building a company, and I always tell people it was like a 17-year James Bond movie. Or it's like climbing Mount Everest with no oxygen, no ropes, no maps. It's super hard. What I find really fascinating about what we do as a firm is we look for the moment that a software company breaks loose and starts accelerating really, really fast. So the minute that revenue goes from 5 million to 10 to 20 to 40, that's the exact moment that we want to invest. And we're currently watching about 120,000 companies globally. So whenever somebody gets angel money or Series A money, we start to watch them. And as they mature a little bit, we start to talk to them to develop a relationship and also ask them a bunch of questions about what's going on, how are you doing, how's revenue growth, how's profit. And it all boils down in a really fascinating way. And, oh, good. The clicking is working. That's good. Every year, we actually talk with 20,000 CEOs like Sandeep and ask those questions. And from those conversations, 2,500 of them, we say, let's go meet them and learn more about what they're doing. In the end, we only find about 250 that are growing that fast. And then in the very end, we only make 25 investments, which for an entrepreneur is frightening, right? I mean, there's 120,000 entrepreneurs that have raised money, developed a product, solving a problem, putting payroll on credit cards, all that kind of stuff. And only 25 in the end actually have that type of accelerated growth. And it turns out that if revenue is growing that fast, it means that whatever problem you're solving, the market really wants to solve right now. So the market is moving to solve that problem. And it also means that you have an elegant solution. And if you put those two things together, you'll get that hypergrowth. We ended up starting this program called Insight Ignite because we realized that every single one of those companies is doing something related to digital transformation because the whole world right now is focused on digital. Every board is worried about it. Every CEO is worried about it. I mean, it is the topic right now in large global companies. So it turns out that we have 120 companies that are core to digital transformation. So we'll hear more about it today. We're going to interview the CIOs and hear their point of view on digital. But it turns out that you guys are actually right in the middle of what the market is trying to do right now. And we'll talk about that in a second. So what Ignite does is we work with large corporates to understand what is their digital strategy, highest level, 20,000 feet, how do you articulate it? And you'd be surprised how many companies can't articulate it. It's scary, actually. Sometimes I'll ask for one sentence and they'll give me 45 minutes, and I know they haven't boiled it down yet. And we also ask them, what are the underlying drivers, technology drivers of that digital transformation? And that's where they'll say, well, AI or IoT or Agile DevOps Cloud or cyber or blockchain, whatever it may be. Once we know what those drivers are, we try and accelerate the digital transformation. So that's what this program is all about. What I thought you would find interesting next, I'm going to take a sip of water, is a little insight into what the market is doing right now. None of this will be a surprise, I don't think. And I think Wolfgang's going to be happy. I don't know if he's here, but is Wolfgang here? He'll be happy. The other thing I didn't mention is that the 25 companies, actually a very few come from the Silicon Valley. So if we make 25 investments, 3 might come from here, but the other 22 are from Madrid or Vietnam or Vienna or Geneva or Kansas. You'd be surprised where they come from. I think there's kind of a misconception. A lot of people come to the Silicon Valley every year, and what they don't realize is they're going to learn about the future, but they may not find things that they can use today to accelerate their digital transformation. So hybrid cloud has been a huge focus. In 2014, we made 3 investments. One was in Docker at the exact right moment. One was in Mirantis, which at the time was doing OpenStack. They've actually pivoted towards Kubernetes and Spinnaker now, sort of a cloud backplane type technology. And then we also invested in SkyTab, which is helping solve the legacy application modernization problem. So that was the first wave. We actually have a second wave coming now, which is around how do you manage the hybrid cloud. So there's a lot of issues around cyber, a lot of issues just around managing workloads. We have a couple of really interesting investments coming in this domain that I can't announce yet, but that's really kind of the next wave now is how do you manage it, how do you secure it? You guys will be very, very happy to know this, and that is that DevOps started popping hugely onto our radar. So we started zooming in to find out what's going on in DevOps, and it turns out that the market wanted to solve this continuous testing problem. Testing was becoming a giant agility roadblock and was popping onto the radar of people like Jennifer and Andy, so you're here today, but you're right in the eye of the storm on a problem that the market wants to solve. So we made 4 big bets. Our biggest one by far was Tricentis. We invested $165 million in their business, and it's a massive bet for us. We also invested in Checkmarx, which is application security testing, Sonar Source, which is code quality testing, and QA Symphony in the test management space. So big. We invested almost $500 million in testing because the market wants to solve that problem. This is the one that would make Wolfgang happy. You would think that AI is this massive topic, and there are sort of shooting stars left and right on AI and explosions everywhere. Turns out, no, it's all super, super nascent. We've only found 5 to invest in so far. 3 of those are in cybersecurity, so Silence, which you may have heard of, which is protecting the endpoint, Recorded Future, which is kind of scouring the deep web to see what the bad guys are up to, and then Darktrace, which is kind of seeing what the bad guys are doing once they get in. And then we also found 2 really interesting ones in fintech. There's a couple of very powerful use cases. But the trick with AI is the machine has to be able to get its hands on the data. And if it can't, the machine can't learn and AI can't be effective. So it's actually a topic that's very close to Jennifer's heart that I may ask about a little bit later. The other kind of big topic in cyber is automation. So we're seeing lots of automation platforms, automation plays. You know, we're seeing the same thing here in testing, but automation is becoming a very big topic for CIOs. Every opportunity they can find to automate, they want to automate. And that's starting to happen at a big pace in cybersecurity. Blockchain and IoT, we're just watching. Again, you would think these are the 2 of the hottest topics on the planet. We haven't found a single company yet that's growing at the pace that we'd like to see to make an investment, so we're just watching for the shooting stars on that one. So with that, I want to transition. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight. It's a really different point of view. You know, if you go to the Silicon Valley firms, you'll hear excitement about all these things in the future, but we actually look for what does the market want to do at the moment, and it turns out that transforming testing is what the market wants to do right now, which makes this whole discussion very relevant. So with that, did I hit the 10-minute target? Where's Wayne?
You're good.
Yeah? Okay. Maybe if I could ask you to introduce yourself.
My name's Jennifer Siepel, and I am the former CIO of Honda, also Kimberly-Clark, and my latest adventure was at USAA Financial Services. So I've gone across a few industries, and so maybe I can share some of my thoughts. But I have a question for you guys. How many of you think that your CIO gets testing or cares about testing in the strategic direction of what you're trying to accomplish as a company? How many?
Okay.
5.
All right.
5, yeah. So what we thought we... So we do, and we're going to talk a little bit today about that, about why we think it's so important and why they will too, and maybe give you some ideas about how you can help them understand.
Andy?
Yeah, and Andy Walter, a little bit different kind of path because I did 26 years at Procter & Gamble. Really worked in every aspect of P&G's business, including globally in Geneva as the CIO and shared service leader for Europe. But my last role was interesting. My last role was the systems of engagement. So I was responsible for all the commercial systems and services across sales, marketing, digital marketing, e-business. And then they thought that was interesting, but they said, okay, the other half of your role is I own project delivery for the whole company. And that included all M&A, all corporate restructure, and all new capabilities. And that's where some of this starts playing out pretty big.
That's great. So we recently bought a company called Diligent, and what they do is they secure board materials and board communications. So I've started spending a lot of time with board directors at really large global companies. And a couple things were really surprising to me. One is just the focus on digital in the boardroom is a very, very, very big topic. Right there with cybersecurity. Off the record, what was also a little bit surprising is the lack of knowledge about digital in the boardroom. That's why many global CIOs and chief digital officers and CISOs are actually making their way into the boardroom to help bring that perspective. But I wanted to first ask both of our CIOs here just about giving a little point of view on just, within whether it's Honda or USAA, just kind of what's happening from a digital standpoint and what kind of pressures are you feeling and what does that cause you to do from a CIO standpoint?
Yeah. So right now, it is the words everybody uses for everything, digital transformation. But I think it means different things to different companies. And the one thing, though, that I do know is it's about speed and agility. That's really what we're talking about. And for some companies, they can do that within IT, and that's about it. So you have that limitation of trying. But for the companies that are really competitive or really want to be disruptive, they're taking it to the next level. And it starts with the DNA of the company, saying, look, we are going to be not only a data insight-driven company, but we're also going to be focused on design thinking and developing our applications in a way that connects with the consumer and creates that one-on-one personalization. And you do that through DevOps and a focus, like I said, on design thinking for applications. The best companies that I've worked with, like USA is one of them, they're really good at getting everybody in the entire company focused on supporting those experience teams, we call them, which is really the application development teams working with the business. So the entire organization, testing is automated and there when they need it. Things are provisioned exactly as those experience teams need them. And that's what's creating the speed and the connection with the consumer. And so for me, those kinds of opportunities to work with those kinds of companies, it's really exciting because it's all about you and the focus of what you're trying to do from an application development perspective.
So it's interesting, when we make a big investment in a company, we often set up something called the Growth Advisory Board, where we bring CIOs together to help guide the company on product strategy, if we're going to go acquire things, provide guidance, messaging, positioning, pricing, channel. Sandeep and I reached out to 60 CIOs thinking we might get 16 was our goal. And it turned out that all 60 wanted to consider joining on this board. And we actually had to completely restructure our plans, and we ended up bringing 34 of the world's biggest CIOs onto the board here because they want to help the company and the market solve this problem. One of the things in Ireland we heard, which was really interesting, is we had, I think, 8 or so of the board members there. And I have a friend who spends about 500 million euros on manual testing at a large European bank. And I was asking him, if we could save you 300 million, would that be a big deal, right? Would it be exciting to reallocate that money towards digital? And it turns out what the CIOs told us is, I actually don't care about the cost savings. What I want is the agility, right? I mean, agility is the whole ballgame right now for CIOs, which I thought was really interesting because I thought the 300 million was pretty exciting, and they said, no, it's the agility that we want. So I'd love to hear a bit just about CPG because I know there's a lot happening there, and there's a big potential shift towards direct to consumer, and what's happening there.
Yeah, and Jennifer hit on the key word for me, and it's disruption. I think what I've seen over the last 5 years or so is there's no company that's too large to be disrupted, and P&G included. You know, if you think about our shave care business alone, the Gillette business, you know, we had to devalue the business 20% because of Dollar Shave Club. You know, it is disrupting our business, and folks are really being challenged, you know, with this across the industry, the CPG industry. It's interesting, the kind of digital journey for P&G started in the early 2000s. And I remember it because I was responsible for creating all the digital e-commerce platforms. And then Webvan imploded. So if you remember, you know, the Taj Mahal over in Foster City, right. You know, Webvan went out of business.
Yeah, George Shaheen.
Yeah, and there were a lot of P&G executives and the board who were like, thank God, this internet thing is going away. We're not going to have to worry about this anymore. And literally, I had a session with summer interns, and we sat down with our incoming CEO, A.G. Lafley, and it was all a trick by me to basically, the summer interns were going to work on why P&G needed to get back into e-business and digital and so forth and so on. So we set up this whole thing because at the end of the summer, the interns get to present to the CEO.
Right, wow.
So AG's sitting there, myself and our sales leader, and after about 30 seconds of them starting to present, he stops the meeting and stops it and just says, hold on a second. He turns to me and he said, this is for me, isn't it? I said, yes. He goes, we need to be wherever she wants to buy our product. That's when P&G got back into digital, back in e-commerce. But it's been interesting. I mean, we've been trying to disrupt every part of our business, whether it's sales, whether it's supply chain or whatever. And it's interesting, you know, the biggest barrier for a lot of CPG companies, including P&G, is the speed. Mm-hmm. You know, mm-hmm. So we have massive legacy systems, and making changes to those systems is very complicated. And we're still living in a world where, you know, a lot of folks are still doing a lot of manual testing, and it's becoming the barrier, and it's accelerating the disruption, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. because the disruptors don't have that issue.
Right. So we have these digital roundtables around the world where we bring 30 or 40 CIOs together and we debate these topics. We had one in Iceland that was really interesting in March, and we had a breakout session there, and we broke it up by industry, so banking, utilities, you know, healthcare, industrial, and I asked everyone, tell me, what does digital transformation mean for your business? And we were going to try and roll it up into what does it mean for the industry? And what was fascinating is all they wanted to talk about was the legacy infrastructure that's got us stuck, the legacy applications have us stuck, the legacy culture has us stuck. And so that was really fascinating and frightening to hear. And then we had another session in Ireland, and I was asking, how do you do the inception? Like, how do you come up with these game-changing ideas that are going to be disruptive from a digital standpoint? Nobody had an answer there. They just wanted to talk more about the legacy issues. And then we had a speaker that actually, for me, caused like a major light bulb, and I'll get to my question in a second. He was talking about agility and why you need agility. He's the COO of Deutsche Börse, which is a competitor to the London Stock Exchange or the NYSE. And he was basically arguing that if you can get yourself up to full speed and you have the agility, you're going to ultimately find those innovative ideas. And it struck me that it's kind of like panning for gold. I mean, you really have to put a lot of rock and a lot of mud through the system to find those little nuggets, right? And that's what agility is all about. So I'd love to hear, I mean, I know you've got a strong point of view about software and sort of how to think about digital, et cetera. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so here's how I think about it. Cool place to be right now, because I think as we start looking into the future, it's going to become more and more important. All of our companies out there are living in this hybrid world where we have the cloud, we have on-prem, we have data in motion, we have, you know, data just sitting there. We have AI, we have BI, we have all this dynamic going on. And it used to be that we used to just say, okay, we're going to keep them separate, until we started realizing that integrating them and coexisting together is where all the power is. So I really think that technologies like IoT and AI are going to start really pushing us to learn how to bring those different kinds of data and develop applications in this coexisting environment. Mm-hmm. And so right now what I'm seeing are a lot of companies investing in application development, continuous automation and testing, data skills, really to make sure that they're prepared for what's about to happen. Because when you add on 5G and more compute power, CPUs to GPUs, things are going to start speeding up. I think it's going to be game-changing for different companies or different technologies like the auto industry. I think it's going to change driverless cars because this is what they need. They need faster decision-making. I think it's going to take us from machine learning to deep learning, and really the applications have to be ready for this. Toyota just announced that they're putting Alexa in the vehicles, and they have this really funny YouTube out there. I don't know if you guys have seen it. It's gone viral because Alexa is basically telling the police officer everything that the driver did wrong along the way. It's fantastic. But the point is that companies are going to have to start thinking about how they can tie into that, into the vehicle, to the consumer. And so I just think it's going to have all these opportunities for the application development teams, continuous testing of data tied to applications. It's going to be really important.
It's really exciting. So I know, Andy, you were working on a really big, I think it was a reverse merger, I think, right?
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear the story about how testing popped onto your radar.
Yeah, and this is where this space really became critical from my perspective, and I realized how far behind we were. So in 2013, I take over the project delivery for the company. Unbeknownst to me, 6 months later, they bring me under the tent and say, we're going to sell 20% of the company. And we're going to sell about 100 brands. And two big transactions. There were a lot of small transactions and two big. The first one was Duracell. So we sold Duracell to Berkshire Hathaway. You know, we've done lots of acquisition divestitures. This one was a bit unusual because Berkshire had no systems. So we were transitioning a company to Berkshire, and there was nothing on the other side to receive it. So we literally were setting up a $4 to $5 billion company from the start. Really cool project. You know, we're going to do a lot in the cloud, everything like that. And then we come to the game plan and say, well, how are we going to test to make sure this thing works? And we did it the same way we did it 15 years ago when we acquired Gillette. 40,000 manual test cases, you know, on the Duracell business. And then without a chance to even breathe, we announced we're selling a big chunk of the beauty business to Coty. Over 100,000 manual test cases on that transaction. And at that point realized this is no longer sustainable. But more importantly, we as IT became the bottleneck for the company. They could not do anything else. As a matter of fact, we had to tell the rest of the business, we can't make any changes for you, you know, for the next 18 months because we've got to do these transactions. That's the biggest priority for the company. And now as I'm advising life sciences companies as well, where there's a lot of M&A activity happening, even more than CPG, it's the same issue. So this space of continuous testing and the ability, I think, is going to be core to companies being able to dynamically evolve their structures, their M&A, joint ventures, all these type of areas. Yeah. So we kind of, while we were doing the Coty, we started kind of a covert project of like, how are companies going to be structured in the future? And there's no way you can do this without this continuous testing and DevOps and the agility and speed that it brings to you. So it was interesting. The project leaders would use that 40,000, 100,000 manual test cases as a badge of honor. You know, right. And how do you change that culture to this is not how we can run? And like I said, the disruption is only speeding up.
Wow. You know what I would add to that is, how many of you, just a quick question, how many of you are in a DevOps model right now? And how many are in a enterprise-wide DevOps? It's rare. It's rare, but man, it's a beauty when you get that. When you can get to that, when you're doing enterprise safe, you know, agile across the company, it's really, really magic. Mm-hmm. The challenge is, and we were talking about this last night, is I've done that at companies before where we moved forward with everything and we didn't think about testing. We were doing testing manually the way that it always had been done, and yet we had an enterprise that was moving at the speed of light. And I don't care who you are as a CIO out there, to your point, you do not want to be the bottleneck.
Yeah.
That's slowing everything down. And it became critical. If you're doing DevOps, you just have to automate, and it has to be continuous so that you don't skip a beat.
And I was really excited to learn this week with Tricentis move to capabilities in the cloud. Because if we think about setting up Duracell for Berkshire, it was all in the cloud. You know, so being that is going to be a key part of this agility as companies move forward and kind of, again, transform themselves on the fly. And it's not just M&A. It's corporate structure, it's tax structure, it's all these areas that for big, you know, multinational enterprises, absolutely critical to succeeding.
That's great. So in the year 2000, I spent a year on the road interviewing the market and asking, what's the single biggest thing that stands in the way of truly accelerated software delivery? And what I kept hearing about was the upfront definition of the requirements, right? And back then, this is in the waterfall days, and people kept saying the writing of the functional requirements is like a giant bottleneck and roadblock that ultimately sort of chokes the whole software delivery process. And even when, you know, storyboards came around and yellow stickies and, you know, Sharpie markers and all this, the requirements problem still hasn't been solved. And ultimately what we came up with was a real-time collaborative functional prototyping platform for product managers. And we were arguing that prototyping should shift upstream and that product managers should actually be using prototyping as a tool. And what made it a 17-year James Bond movie was that it was a people, process, and technology transformation to make that happen. And that's why I'm actually really fascinated by Tricentis, is that the technology is a really important part of the solution, but the people and process side is the truly critical part. And I'd love to hear, you know, from both you guys. And I think, you know, the tricky part about testing is a lot of times when Sandeep and I reach out to a CIO, we say, hey, we want to talk to you about this new automated continuous testing platform. The CIO's first reaction is always, oh, let me defer you to Wipro, or let me defer you to my head of QA. And we're getting better at making an argument that says, no, this is actually something that requires your sponsorship. And I'm just wondering, any advice that you can share with the room about how to help the CIO get their head around the why, and also how to help the CIO get their head around the people, process, and technology transformation that's required?
Yeah. So I think the beauty of creating a DevOps model, true DevOps, has the business, the product owner there, it has IT there, it has design, it has digital. I mean, you are a powerful team that is empowered to come to an end game for the consumer, to connect with the consumer. And when those teams come together in that powerful way, and they own the entire end-to-end process, there's opportunities for innovation. And so when I look at this from an application development and testing standpoint, that is so critical to making sure that those innovations or that connection with the consumer can happen. You can't do it manually, part way, and everybody else meeting at the speed of light. You're not working on projects anymore. You're working on stories and sprints. And the entire team is owning the responsibility for that. And so I think that setting up, even if you're in an organization right now that isn't DevOps, find a really cool president of a business area and team them up with your CIO and show what can be done. It is really powerful. It catches on like wildfire, and the rest of the company will want to get involved.
Yeah, when you have that conversation, you know, my big learning, every big transformation I drove at P&G or at other companies, you know, it's not by talking to them about the functional benefits of this product. You know, so we were joking yesterday, we both work for companies that, you know, create diapers. So how many folks have kids? So P&G will, you know, have great commercials where they talk about the functional benefits of diapers. You know, how much can they absorb, or the fact that they don't leak. Those are really important to you. But when P&G can talk to a mother and say, the Pampers diaper is going to let your baby sleep all night and let you get some rest. Suddenly I'm talking about the emotional benefits. And then you say, well, and not only that, but if your baby sleeps all night, that's healthy for their development. So I moved from, you will not engage your CIO, or even more so, the president of a business unit, talking about functional benefits. You will talk about emotional benefits. So what are the emotional benefits? The Vantive story was fantastic today, and Raj and I have met previously in Cincinnati. It's what can I do with my business now that I have this, that I couldn't do before? What new capabilities can I bring to grow my business? For a P&G, what if we could acquire a company or divest a brand in months, not years? What would I be able to do? So it's really start thinking about how do I raise up that discussion, not to the, let me talk about the functional benefits we could do if we were in the DevOps and testing model, but what would you be able to do for your business if you had that? If you can make changes that quick. If the CIO, when they went to the audit committee on the board, you could talk about how you helped their risk coverage and how the company's now better protected than it ever was before. Because I still think there's a lot of senior leadership that don't understand how precarious of a position they're in if these systems aren't up and running. So again, they're still kind of, it's interesting over the last 10 years how dependent companies have become on software. And a lot of the leadership doesn't still understand that.
Yeah.
If P&G systems aren't up, we don't ship anything. So we had an interesting upgrade happening in Europe when I was there, and I went to the president. I said, hey, I just need to let you know that we're doing this change this weekend. And he goes, well, if it doesn't go well, what will happen? I go, well, we won't be shipping. He goes, what do you mean we won't be shipping? I said, we won't be shipping anything anywhere in Europe. $20 billion business. He goes, anywhere? Nowhere. He immediately sends out a note to every general manager and says, you will support this change. And so, but I'm not seeing that happen consistently. Folks don't understand, the fact that software is now so critical to running the business.
Right. Well, hopefully, and if you could start thinking about questions now, I want to open up to the room, but what we've heard today is that digital is the topic in the boardroom. It's the topic for CIOs. I think the other thing we heard today is agility is the #1 topic for CIOs. I think we have an opportunity to point out to the CIO that we have Agile. Most organizations are making pretty good progress on Agile from a process standpoint. We have the public cloud. Everyone is moving towards Amazon AWS or Azure. What we're missing is we have this roadblock, which is the traditional manual testing. If we can just point that roadblock out and get the sponsorship of the CIO, we can deliver this agility and hopefully have a much more emotional conversation about the business value. So with that, I would love to take a few questions if there are any in the audience. Maybe you have a microphone? Yeah, I do. I've got it. Yep.
It's mic on.
Thanks.
Hi there, Scott Milliner with Functionize. So I love the focus on the agility because one thing in the whole testing space is it's easy to talk about cutting costs.
Yeah.
Less people, scripting, manual, et cetera, but in really the CXOs want to know about an ROI. How does it affect revenue? So how do you think about quantifying agility from an ROI or revenue standpoint? And so obviously the speed is great because you got to be competitors, you got to get to market, and don't want to be the bottleneck. Do you think about actually an ROI or how it affects revenue, the agility?
For
Wanna take
sure.
that one?
I would definitely recommend that. That always rings a bell with CXOs. I think that what resonates from what I've seen, what resonates the most is if you can show, the speed and agility, but also the business value, like he was talking about. Like, what is it that you bring to the table? Are you reducing risk in the environment? Are you bringing out a new product? Are you allowing new capability within the company because of the things that you're doing? I don't think a lot of the CXO understands how important you guys are.
Yeah. When we broke the ROI into 3 points. We didn't walk away from the savings. And by the way, we would have answered Emmett's question differently. We would take the $300 million for sure right now. So we did look at hard savings. We called it 1A. We looked at 1B, which was soft savings. And soft savings typically were in those business units, especially as speed to initiative launch, things like that. And then we did actually track sales. How could we accelerate sales? Because it was interesting. My big learning running project delivery for P&G, and we had 1,000 project managers across the corporation, and we're probably working with another 5,000 kind of resources with partners. it no longer was the case that people were upset because the cost of the project was X. What they were upset with, because in the waterfall mentality, it takes so long to get value. So when we started doing Agile and DevOps, we also started doing critical constraint project management and start executing these projects in a much more agile way. So we start delivering value in 6 months, at 12 months, at 18 months, instead of the traditional model, which was launch the project and in 24 months, maybe you'll see some value. So I think it's, get clear on those ROI things, but don't underestimate the speed to value, because that's what the CXO community is looking for. When do I start seeing that value?
And the disruption that's going on out there, there's nothing like that to get people's interest. And so I think that if you're not moving at that speed, you have a potential of being disrupted. One of the great examples is working in financial services, highly regulated, high trust. The focus that we spent almost every second of the day on was application development. How are we going to make that connection? Well, we focused on security too for the trust, but the application development teams and the testing were key, because our customers counted on that for their financial interactions. And so I just feel like fintechs and all kinds of companies out there are able to move so fast. It's a great disruption example.
One of the thought, we just did a very interesting research project at the private equity firm. We hired an agency and asked them to find, out of the global 2,000, who are the 200 that are actually the most serious about digital. And we called the project Read the Tea Leaves. So we gave them a bunch of things to look for. Did they put somebody with technology experience on the board? Did they hire a chief digital officer from outside the industry? Did they set up an incubator? Did they set up a venture firm? Is the CEO making bold public statements about digital? And what was fascinating is out of the 2,000, there were only 200 that the firm felt were actually really serious about digital. And I actually think, I wrote a piece recently called The Theater of Digital. I actually think it may only be 20, really, that are truly dead serious about it, that are willing to disrupt themselves in order to get to this new digital age. And so I think the other thing to think about is just, where's the company's mindset? If they are one of these digital disruptors, it may be all about just speed, but more projects, right? So it may not be cost savings. If it's a company that's maybe a little more conservative, maybe it's the agility and the cost savings, right? Maybe one more question, then we'll wrap things up. Anybody?
Okay.
All right. Hopefully that was helpful. Have a good rest of the conference.